Some actors are better in villainous roles than others. That's just the nature of the game. But some actors are so fantastic in villainous roles that it leaves you wanting more whenever you see them in action. Jason Isaacs is such an actor. A man whose seemingly natural, elegant, and regal demeanor and cadence make him the perfect candidate to portray the haughty and snide characters we've seen him meld into throughout the years. And while his performance as Lucius Malfoy in the Harry Potter films is one of his best, I'd argue that it's Colonel William Tavington that is his true claim to villainous fame. Hello everyone, and welcome to the 233rd episode of Analyzing Evil. In this video, we're going to be talking about Colonel William Tavington. What was that? Okay. In this video, we're going to be talking about Colonel William Tavington, the central villain in the movie The Patriot, and one that... Seriously, am I being punked right now? As I was saying, Colonel Tavington is a villain that you hate to... No, really, what the fuck is that? You know what the f this is, baby. That's right, it's America Day. The most freedom-loving, firework-havingest, hot-dog-eatingest day on planet Earth. And I couldn't be happier to be talking about such an appropriate villain on this, the day of our nation's founding. A villain that I dare say is one of my favorites. Now, as fun of a movie as The Patriot is, and as great of a character as Colonel Tavington is, this film is also problematic in a number of ways. One of those ways being its not-so-accurate portrayal of historic events and persons, with much of this story's events and characters being amalgamations of several real occurrences, or people, that aren't really true to what actually happened. And such is the case with our subject for this episode, who was loosely, and I mean very loosely, based off of the commander of the British Legion during the Revolutionary War, then Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton. And because that's true, I won't be talking about any real people or events in this video. But as a fictional historical epic a la Gladiator, The Patriot is a fun ride from start to finish, despite its flaws, and there couldn't be a more appropriate film to discuss on this festive American day. So with all that out of the way, I wish you all a happy 4th of July, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Analyzing Evil. War is always a messy affair, even when it's fought as cleanly as possible. But some men, and by extension those under their command, are wont to make ever bloodier something that is already more brutal than most of us can imagine. Colonel William Tavington was one such man, and his reign of terror across the silver screen is one of legend that has solidified his character as one of the premier villains in cinematic history. But what makes a man like Tavington resort to murdering innocents to such a wanton and barbaric degree that even his own men stand aghast at his actions and commands? Well, if the only line we receive about his family is any indicator, in all likelihood, it was a combination of resentment, embitterment, and the desire to raise up a name that has since been tarnished through the acquisition of great glory on the field of battle. During a meeting with his superior, General Cornwallis, following his ordering of the massacre of several wounded soldiers at Benjamin Martin's plantation and the murder of Benjamin's son, we received the following.
These brutal tactics must stop. Is it not enough, my lord, that I have never lost a battle? You serve me, and the manner in which you serve me reflects upon me. I would have thought that a gentleman from a family as esteemed as yours would understand that.
My late father squandered any esteem in which we were held, along with my inheritance. I advance myself only through victory.
You advance yourself only through my good graces.
There's nothing quite like a once well-off man scorned with a desire to claw his way back to the top, is there? This tiny detail about Tavington's character is really all we need to understand why he does what he does in this film. He's a man who was born into privilege, and he was all but guaranteed to continue enjoying it through his inheritance, but he was denied all of it due to his father's mishandling of their estate. That's enough to make anyone bitter, and so it makes sense that William's perceived injustices would create a drive in him to take back what he was denied by whatever means necessary. That being said, understanding a person or character's motivations for doing what they do is not an excuse, but an explanation. And while we may be able to sympathize a tad with a man who lost it all, poor William Tavington losing his wealth and subsequently committing many, many atrocities to win it back makes it so that sympathy is worth less than dirt. And our first introduction to the man, not to mention nearly every other time we see him in this story, proves that to be true. We first spy Colonel Tavington riding up to Benjamin Martin's plantation, a finely dressed soldier with a regal air to him and a look of snide superiority that immediately tells us that this man holds an immense amount of cruelty behind those serpentine eyes of his. And though the first words out of his mouth are an order to a lieutenant to have their wounded taken to surgeons at Winsboro, everything that comes from him following this moment is nothing short of cold terror.
Fire the house and barns. Let it be known, if you harbor the enemy, you will lose your head.
Who carried this?
I did, sir. Take this one to Camden. Here's a spy. Hang him, put his body on display.
He's a dispatch rider, and that's a marked case.
Destroy the livestock. Save the horses for the dragoons.
Colonel, this is a uniformed dispatch rider and carrying a marked case. He cannot be held as a spy.
Well, we're not going to hold him. We're going to hang him. He's your son. Or perhaps you should have taught him something of loyalty.
Colonel, I beg you, please reconsider. By the rules of war.
Rules of war. Would you like a lesson, sir, in the rules of war? Or perhaps your children will.
Sir, what of the rebel wounded?
Kill them.
Gabriel, run!
Thomas!
That's the kind of man that Colonel William Tavington is. A man who would take every brutal advantage he can to strike fear into the people of the fledgling nation he seeks to gain victory over, and the enemy combatants that defend them, be they wounded, immune from harm, or otherwise. Now, when we're presented with a villain like this, it's sometimes, or even often the case, that at their core, they're sniveling cowards. Bullies who would tear you limb from limb if given the chance, but people who also hide behind their mother's dress if someone so much as points a knife in their direction. Not Colonel Tavington, though. And really, that may just be why his character is such a masterclass in villainy. As a man out for glory who will do anything necessary to achieve it, William Tavington shows us on a few different occasions that also means he's more than willing to put himself in harm's way to achieve his goals. And he does so without an ounce of fear crossing his countenance. While his choice to charge into battle with his dragoons in tow without being ordered to by his commanding officer is overall a detriment to the British war effort, this is one of the primary ways we're shown the fearlessness of his character.
You will be missed tomorrow, Colonel.
Missed, my lord?
A wound.
It's nothing, my lord. I am, as ever, ready to serve.
He commands his legion from the front, leading the charge into battle as charismatic of a warrior as any that one could find on the battlefield. And while such brave recklessness might seem counterintuitive to obtaining a life of wealth, luxury, and prestige considering the great risk associated with it, knowing what we know about Tavington's ambitions makes his foolhardy actions in this story more grounded than one might think otherwise.
I advance myself only through victory.
This is a man who has found his chosen path in life, to become a man worthy of the king's graces and all the gifts granted to one who holds those graces through victory and victory alone. There is no other choice for William other than to press forward and do all he can to win, even if that means putting himself in harm's way, or perhaps especially if it puts him in harm's way. For in Colonel Tavington's mind, it's all or nothing. Win here and now, so victory might lift him up where he believes he belongs, or die trying. For death, for a man like William Tavington, is preferable to living out the rest of his days without that which he desires most in life. And it's a damn shame that this man's fervent all-or-nothing mindset led him to immersing himself in darkness and committing atrocious acts of evil. Now, it's more than likely that Colonel Tavington is inherently a cruel and merciless man, but to what degree he manifests that cruelty to achieve his goals is unknown, because it's entirely possible that when not engaged in battle, William Tavington was a kind and gentle man. However, I feel that's unlikely, mainly because there's a difference between a man who will commit or order acts of barbarity for the sake of victory without passion, and one who thoroughly enjoys doing so. To approach warfare in this way passionately is wrong, and it's still wrong if you approach it dispassionately. But at the very least, when someone who is doing things like Tavington does with some hesitation, it makes them into someone who believes what they're doing are necessary evils, and not evils that they enjoy. Again, still not a good thing. But this distinction can be the defining difference when weighing whether or not to label someone as an evildoer or as a bona fide villain.
You! Are you the ghost, are you? I remember you. From that farm, that stupid little boy. Did he die? You know, it's an ugly business, doing one's duty. But just occasionally, it's a real pleasure.
Spiteful remarks, a haughty demeanor, and a remorseless attitude all convey to us that William, while being a man who is doing what he's doing to advance himself, also thoroughly enjoys doing it. A sadist who cares not for any life other than his own, and one who would see entire nations burn if it meant getting what he wants. Something that's reflected in his willingness to murder all manner of innocents, whether it be the family of a man whom he's trying to destroy in order to smoke him out, the families of the men who follow him, or an entire church filled with men, women, and children whose only crimes were aiding the man actively trying to bring them freedom and prosperity. A man who conducts warfare and personal battles with little honor and a willingness to use every dirty and brutal trick in the book to obtain his victory. Now, it might seem a bit obvious by virtue of his sadism that he felt this way, but something that's interesting to note about William's brutality and recklessness is that he never considered them to be issues due to his many victories. As we already covered, that isn't to say that he was blind to the weight of his actions, as he was clearly aware of how diabolical they were and reveled in them. But when he was being reprimanded for his actions by General Cornwallis, he was flabbergasted because he had assumed that victory was the only thing that ever mattered in war. So for a soldier to be angry with another for the way in which he achieves his victories was a ludicrous notion for Colonel Tavington. That being said, though General Cornwallis did indeed reprimand him at one point for his actions, when push came to shove and Benjamin Martin's militia seemed to be unstoppable, he chose to allow Tavington to operate with impunity, desiring victory over a man that had one-upped him at every turn, more so than he valued the innocent life that would surely fall to Tavington's sword. Something that Tavington smugly chastises him for, as Cornwallis promises him a sizable land grant in Ohio following his service, due to his impending inability to return to England in the wake of his crimes. In the end, though, like many a villain who unleashes evil upon the world, Colonel Tavington's actions would end up being his undoing. For it's his decision to murder a child in the presence of his father that spurred that father into taking up his arms once again and hunting down the man who would see his country and family destroyed. And appropriately, Colonel Tavington falls in the same manner that Benjamin's son Gabriel did when he drove his sword through him, a fitting end for a man who had wrought so much evil upon so many people. And at this end, who was Colonel William Tavington? He was a man who desired more than anything to return to the way of life he had become accustomed to before his father destroyed it. And in doing so, he made himself into a monster worthy of the greatest condemnations as he ran through the American countryside committing acts of brutality that made him into a heinous villain and a criminal of the highest order. Self-serving, merciless, condescending, and cruel beyond imagining, Colonel Tavington was a man who was as dastardly as they come. A snide and wicked man who would see you and your family burned to cinders if it meant advancing himself even a step in the direction he wished to head. A beast who, while not being a one-to-one interpretation of the real person he was based off of, certainly stands as a reminder of the horrors of war and how horrific the men who conduct it can be. A barbaric rendition of a soldier that will forever serve as a reminder that this is not what a soldier truly is, but a man filled with hatred, cruelty, and ambition that deserves to be seen as something less than human, and a creature that more than deserved to drown in his own evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Colonel Tavington? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially Elijah Kai VA, our Dark Lord channel member. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.